So I'd like to start by thanking, obviously, Tess and Archaeology Scotland for this kind invitation to be here today talking to you about risks to rock art. This is a subject that I have been increasingly thinking about recently, and I'm afraid that this talk may have a bit of a depressing tone at times as we go through some of the risks that rock art is currently facing, but hopefully we will end on a more positive note. And I will start by offering a definition of the expression rock art. I always like to offer some definitions of what I am talking about, of what I understand from these expressions and these terms. And the term rock art is quite controversial, mostly because of the use of the word art, which is very Eurocentric, refers to very specific practices that we understand as beautiful and creation and so on, which are not necessarily or do not necessarily reflect people's understanding of these processes in the past. But in general, the term is accepted and is used to describe forms of visual representation that were, and in some places are still, being created on rock surfaces through painting and carving techniques. But beyond this archaeological definition, which is really dry, if you like. The term also includes, when we look at rock art, we have to think that it translates people's spiritual and cultural heritage and also cultural identities. And we have to obviously have this overall understanding of it. It's not just, symbols marked on stones. Oh, I forgot about that one. So there we go. Um, And rock art is quite ubiquitous and can be found in most places of the world, as most of you probably know, in both carved and painted examples. The dates and the location for the earliest examples of rock art are forever changing, but currently it is believed that some of the oldest known cave paintings are located in Indonesia and date to nearly 70,000 years old. And in most parts of the colonized world, rock art is still being created. So there is this huge amount of time where people engaged with the creation of paintings and carvings of their landscapes. And so this is very much a part of people's worldviews. We don't necessarily have people creating rock art in the same way in the UK, but certainly it was a very important practice, and it was a very important part of people's lives, at least during the Neolithic and the early Bronze Age, so between the 4th and the mid-3rd millennium BCE. Um, because if it wasn't important, we probably wouldn't have so many examples of it. And we know that in the UK, there are around 6,000 known rock art sites with large concentrations towards the north. So, obviously, here in Scotland, Northumberland, and Yorkshire. And there are also a few clusters in areas like Derbyshire, excuse me, Wales, and Cornwall. And we keep finding more and more. The distribution in Scotland is not is quite unequal. So we have some main concentrations in Argyll and Bute, where Kilmartin is located, and Kilmartin is very well known for its rock art and other prehistoric monuments. But there are also other concentrations, significant concentrations around Dumfries and Galloway in the southwest and Loch Tay in the centre. And I was part of Scotland's Rock Art Project between 2017 and 2021. And with this project, which aimed at identifying and recording all the known rock art sites in Scotland, and we involved more than 100 volunteers in this process, we also began to have a better idea of the rock art in other parts of the country, other less known parts of the country. And there are other quite significant clusters elsewhere, for instance, in the Highland, where it wasn't as well known. So many of you will have seen examples of prehistoric rock art in Scotland or in England, but for those of you less familiar, the prehistoric rock art that we have in Scotland is mostly known for its cup marks and cup and ring motifs and other circular imagery, as you can see in the screen, which are carved. At the moment, we don't know of any paintings. And these were carved on boulders and outcrops in open landscapes, often in mid-slope areas, so they were relatively accessible in the landscape. These rock surfaces tend to be horizontal, or nearly horizontal, and often are flush with the ground. Um, and as I said, these carvings were very likely created during the Neolithic and the early Bronze Age, although chronology is always a little bit complicated with these things. But they were also reused at later stages in standing stones, funerary monuments, and even in much later periods, as we know, examples of carvings in Iron Age souterrains and even modern field boundaries. And so it seems that the importance of the rock art lingers in time, even if the significance of it might change slightly. So the prehistoric rock art tradition that we have in Scotland is also part of a wider tradition known as Atlantic rock art that we can find, particularly, as I said, in northern England, but also in Ireland, in the island of Ireland, and several places in Portugal and Spain. So it covers a large part of Western Europe. Um, And although there are some examples of very large outcrops, such as Achnabrek in Kilmartin, which I showed in one of my previous slides, um, and these tend to be extensively carved. Some of these larger examples are extensively carved, and they stand out in the landscape. Most commonly, Atlantic rock art was actually created on smaller and medium-sized rock surfaces. And the fact that they are horizontal, often flush with the ground, means that sometimes they are covered by turf, or they are seasonally covered by turf and vegetation, and they can be really difficult to find, even when we have a grid reference or an idea of their location. In addition to this, we have the weathering of the motifs, which sometimes makes them nearly invisible, as you can see in these panels. Um, and if you don't have a trained eye, it's not always easy to identify these motifs, or even distinguish between what is a carved motif and what is a natural feature. And so the identification depends very much on the experience of the person, but also the conditions that we have when we're looking for rock art. For example, if we're going out in certain times of the day, the raking light in the early morning or evening is ideal to look at rock art. But if the day is overcast, then suddenly it becomes a lot harder. And this is where the introduction of 3D imaging techniques have really helped us with this task of identifying and recording rock art more efficiently, as you can see from these examples. And on that animation, you can see what the effect of the raking light does, and how we see. I'll just play that again. And what we see on the rocks changes depending on the direction of the light. So, due to the nature of the rock art, um, the examples that we have in the UK, particularly because they are located outdoors, are very, the rock carvings, the panels are very vulnerable. It's a very vulnerable type of heritage. As I said, they are located in open air contexts. They are generally accessible to everyone, but on the other side, there are also sometimes in very remote areas, which makes it really difficult to reach and to monitor. They are not easy to identify and relocate, and they are generally exposed to a series of risks that we will be talking about today. And in addition to this, in Scotland, but this is a problem that also extends to other parts of the UK, we also face issues with legal protection, since, for instance, only 6 of the 3,000 or so rock art panels are actually properties in care, and less than 5% are designated as scheduled monuments. And these include rock art examples that are incorporated into other monuments, which are less than 200. And this is a very small number when compared to the 20% of picture symbol stones, for instance, that are scheduled monuments, or the 36% of early medieval cross slabs, which are also scheduled. And this means that a very large number of sites, of rock art sites, have no legal protection. And this also means that they are not, for example, included in impact assessment studies, and they are at risk, essentially. Another issue that we face is that of data management. Rock art has been recorded by many people since the 19th century, resulting in a quite inconsistent record. Some panels have been documented with a lot of detail. Others are very fragmentary, have very fragmentary information, incorrect descriptions, inconsistent details, a lot of wrong grid references, which is why sometimes it's so difficult to identify them and find them, which is a problem if we are dealing with development projects that where we really need to know where these things are. Um, and so there's misleading information in some of these records, which are in general quite dispersed. And this poses problems for research, for management, for conservation, and for education and engagement as well. So I mentioned Scotland's Rock Art project earlier, and this project aimed to solve part of this problem by creating a record for all the rock art in the country following a standardized methodology. So all the panels would be recorded the same way throughout the country, and creating a database that condensed all the available information for rock art, including records from Canmore, which is now Trove, and also from the local HERs. The fieldwork part of this project was heavily impacted by COVID. We were in the middle of this when COVID hit, but we still managed to record around 1,600 panels with our local teams of volunteers, and the records are freely accessible in the project's website, which you have the link there for. And well, it is now back online. It was offline for a while, but it is now being hosted by Scarf, so it's now back online, and it includes information such as grid references, descriptions, photographs, and also access to all the 3D models that were created for each of the panels recorded, which are also available on Sketchfab. And again, there are a couple of links for that there. So, the issues with identification, with the legal protection and data management make it really difficult to protect rock art effectively against all the risks that it is facing. And here are the main risks, and we are going to break them down now. So, firstly, we have natural risks. So the carvings are created outdoors in boulders and in outcrops in these open landscapes, and are obviously exposed to the elements which are in them, which themselves lead to weathering and erosion. So although we may think that stone and rock is durable, that it's a durable medium, we must accept that there will inevitably be some loss of rock art over time, if nothing else, because it is exposed to all these natural weathering processes, which may include differential weathering. And this is when the rock art may have different levels of hardness or different minerals which weather at different rates and produce uneven or pitted surfaces, as you can see there in these pictures. Temperature variation, so freeze, thaw, or exposure to heat, persistent flow of water and pools on the rock surfaces, which are one of the main agents for rock art deterioration. And as you know, it rains a lot in Scotland. So these are some of the main natural risks. We also have biological growths, and these include lichens, mosses, algae, and the presence of these elements may exacerbate moist conditions due to the presence of water, and may affect the rock surface. We don't know exactly how this works and how it affects directly the rock art. So we definitely need some more studies, detailed studies there. But we know, for example, that lichens can damage carvings through acidic secretions or by inducing stress in the rock surface as a result of dehydration and rehydration processes. So this kind of drying and getting wet really doesn't help, and it can accentuate erosion and weathering of the rock surface, and as a result, the carvings as well. We also have vegetation growth, which can affect the carved panels, particularly those that are more flush with the ground. As I said, they get seasonally covered by turf and grass. And we have quite a few examples of shrubs and trees that are growing their panels, and causing root damage or rubbing the surfaces, which again also causes stress on the carvings. And as you can see, there is on your right side, there's an example of a carved panel that actually had to be completely removed because it was broken by the roots of this tree in Ormeig, in Kilmartin. And the other problem is that this vegetation creates fuel for fires, which, as we will see, is a much bigger problem. In addition to also promoting the growth of algae and lichens. We obviously need to talk about the exposure to animal activity, which can be both a natural risk and a human risk. Obviously, if we think about animal droppings, they also have chemical compositions that can harm the rock surfaces. But in most cases, the animal risks tend to relate to land management and domestic livestock rubbing or trampling on the panels, chipping and scratching them away with their hooves, particularly when they are low-lying. And sometimes panels become quite worn and polished and can actually be fractured. So as you can see, there's some examples here, and there are so many examples of animals walking over the carvings. So those were the natural risks, and human actions are probably the main risks to rock art. So as I mentioned land management in terms of animal livestock, but land management in particular can be a very serious issue for rock art. As you may imagine, we have a number of agricultural practices, including pasture, plowing, the use of various types of heavy machinery that can cause significant damages to known rock art, but also unknown rock art sites, because some of them are covered, especially when they're low-lying or buried. And we do see sometimes plow marks on the rock surfaces, or carvings used in dikes, as you can see there, or even dumped in clearance cairns. So we know that these activities have an impact on the rocks, on the carvings. More recently, and this is something that we have been really worried about, the agriculture bill, which was passed in 2024 to support land improvements, does not account for heritage, and we're already seeing sites being affected by this. Which this means that essentially people can improve their landscape without actually having to um, have any particular considerations towards heritage. And as you can see on the bottom of that slide, this is quite an extreme case, but that group of carvings in Dumfries and Galloway then ended up quite different on the right, and I'm not even sure that all the rocks are there, to be honest. Um, there are other associated activities with land management that we should be worried about, and these include controlled burning, which may lead to wildfires, planting and forestry, and these projects tend to take very large areas, and they also involve heavy machinery. And you can see that panel on the bottom left of your screen is a scheduled monument in Stracher, which was severely damaged during felling in a forestry area. So finally, rock art is also at risk from development projects of various types, of course. We have quarries, infrastructure development, renewable energy projects, and they all affect rock art directly and indirectly. So quarries obviously remove bedrocks directly, and they can destroy the carvings completely. And this is for this reason that the rock that you see there, that very large panel at Greenland, in Dunbartonshire, was carefully cut into chunks and moved into the museum because it was at risk from a local quarry. But a lot of these development projects often involve activities such as drilling, soil movement, excavations, the use of heavy machinery, which can impact the rock surfaces, but also produce vibrations during the construction phases that may destabilize the rocks, generate cracks, fissures, lead to the accumulation of dust particles and other pollutants that may actually accentuate weathering and erosion. And there are a few studies that are starting to look into this in other parts of the world. We're just not there yet, but we should. And obviously, by changing the surroundings of the rock art, removing the surrounding vegetation, for example, and changing the type of vegetation or increasing the foot or vehicle traffic, these are all things that may affect the rock art in the long term, even if they are not directly destroyed by any of these developments. And obviously, more recently, we have a surge in renewable energy projects that are becoming a major concern to rock art. One, because they take very large areas and they are starting to overlap with areas with lots of rock art. But also because there are a lot of incentives and fast track planning processes for the development of wind and solar farms so that governments can achieve their net zero targets. And I am of the opinion that rock art is not being completely included in these environmental impact assessment studies that need to kind of precede the construction of these large renewable projects. So, and this is what concerns me, is that I looked at a few projects here in Scotland, and what I see in these studies is that the rock art sites are only considered superficially. The mitigation generally points at avoidance of direct physical impact. So as long as they're not directly impacted, that's fine. They sometimes implement exclusion zones, so they delimit areas where people should not be working, or where the projects should not affect the rock art. And the main concern generally tends to be changes to setting. Now, again, from a planning and impact assessment perspective, we're still not thinking about the increased vibration, the accumulation of particles, the changes to soil or chemistries of the rocks, which may really accentuate erosion significantly. And at this point, we should also remember that only 5% of more than 3,000 sites are scheduled monuments, and therefore only 5% have legal protection, and impact assessments do not need to include other sites that are not designated, which generally are only just briefly mentioned. In addition to that, we have another problem with rock art, which, albeit being considered interesting and enigmatic and raising much interest, it's generally still not treated the same way as all the other kinds of archaeology. And so I think rock art tends to be thought of as a group of markings on a rock surface, and we don't tend to think about the possibility of buried archaeological remains in the surroundings of the panels, and we actually know very little about it because there's only been a very small number of archaeological excavations around rock art sites. But the fact is that every time there are some archaeological excavations being carried out, we do recover archaeological context and materials, and this is also being demonstrated by a couple of geophysical surveys that were carried out in Ireland, and one here in Dumfries and Galloway, which was set up by Scrap but ended up being carried out by HES. So we do know that there are other types of activity around the rock art sites that we are also not considering. Now, going back to the human risks in this category, we also need to include tourism. As I said, rock art tends to captivate a variety of audiences, and it's often sought by visitors. And this is very good to raise awareness, but it also causes a different set of issues, particularly if not managed effectively. And this includes incidents of graffiti, vandalism, and theft. And even World Heritage sites that have detailed management plans, as you may imagine, suffer from these problems. So on the bottom left of your screen, you can see an image of a panel located in the Portuguese Coa Valley, which is a World Heritage site known for its open-air Paleolithic rock art. And someone etched a bicycle and a stick figure over a very, very a rare incision of a human figure. And I'm just going to show you where, because you can't really see on the panel, this is where the carvings are. Originally, you can see the aurochs, a horse, and the human, and the bicycle was etched right on top of it. Um, and finally, so we've talked about natural risks and human risks. We have to talk about climate change, which again is a bit of a combination of both, really. And this is a very big concern for rock art on many levels. One of the most immediate risks come from more intense and frequent storms and rainfall events, as we have seen recently. And these tend to wash away the thin protective layers from the rock surfaces and expose the carvings. Um, but they also lead to this saturation and drying cycles that we talked about, which can weaken the rock surface and result in granular disintegration and therefore disintegration of the carvings themselves. The rising global temperatures, of course, increase the likelihood of wildfires. And these not only remove vegetation, they destabilize soils, but they also burn the rocks themselves. And the heat can cause thermal stress and can lead to fractures and flaking, as you can see on this smaller image on the screen. And wildfires are a massive concern already in places like Iberia, where some of my colleagues are already starting to talk about the extinction of rock art, which is quite sad. And in the UK, we are seeing some incidents of wildfires every year, and we have the example of Fylingdales in Yorkshire, which already involved a series of rock art sites. So we should be thinking ahead of it. Climate change also intensifies freeze and thaw cycles. And obviously, if carvings are located in coastal areas, then coastal erosion and sea level rise also means accentuated erosion and loss. And we already see that as well in carvings, for instance, in caves um, uh, on our coast. So, to mitigate all of this, governments have net zero targets, obviously, in which they support and obviously promote the development of renewable projects, which then leads us to the issues that we discussed previously with development. So I have been telling you about some of the risks that rock art sites are facing right now, and I'm just going to take the last 5 minutes to offer you um, a more positive perspective and some ideas of what we can do to actually protect rock art. So obviously we need to address these risks as much as possible and quite urgently. The protection of rock art and the historic environment needs to be considered in land management policies, strategies, and legislations. We need measures for safeguarding rock art. Um, and these need to be revised and include designating sites as scheduled monuments. We need to schedule more rock art sites. We need more rock art sites legally protected. And if you think that you know any sites that are worth scheduling, you can do that. Anyone can do that. We can submit proposals to Historic Environment Scotland for that. And we also need to look at rock art as any other type of archaeological site included in our planning processes in a more effective way, and also consider all the associated archaeology potential archaeology with it. We also need to train more heritage professionals, particularly those involved in these consultancy processes, so that we can properly identify and include rock art in environmental impact assessments in a more comprehensive manner. By doing this, we are not only contributing to a better protection and safeguard of rock art, but we are also bringing it more firmly into mainstream archaeology. And in the long term, the application of a range of methods that are not typically used in rock art studies, such as geophysical surveys, excavations, have the potential to create new data sets, perhaps sometimes surprising information that we hadn't come across or we didn't think that would be associated with rock art, and will contribute significantly for our understanding of rock art's context and the resource in general. Now, we cannot protect what we don't know, and to better preserve rock art, we need to have better data and better awareness. And we need to continue working with local communities to raise awareness for rock art vulnerability, to identify what rock art is at risk and how, extend the recording of projects such as Scrap to continue generating a comprehensive digital database and synchronize the national and regional databases fully, making them publicly accessible. Um, and for Scotland, as I said, a lot of the data that the data that Scrap generated is available online on our website. And there was a similar resource for England's rock art database, which also had their own website, which is now not working. But all the data set has been transferred to ADS. So that is also a useful resource. However, although Scrap's data was transferred into Canmore, which is now Trove, and the local HERs, I don't think the same actually happened with the data generated by England's rock art. So you can see that there is a problem there if somebody needs to do an impact assessment study and they will consult Heritage Gateway or the HERs and the data isn't there. It's also imperative that we develop more studies on conservation and management of rock art sites. There are a few publications. Most of them come from Australia and other parts of the world where rock art is very much a living thing because it's part of their traditional owners and local communities' lives. And we need also to exchange experiences and collaborate with international projects and colleagues who are already facing certain problems so that we can get ahead of some of the issues that we are starting to see here, such as the wildfires. In the UK, there are no systematic studies on conservation for rock art, but there was a project, the CARE project, led by Aaron Maisel from Newcastle University, which launched some bases for risk assessment of rock art and produced an evaluation toolkit and a mobile ad, but I am not sure how widely it is actually used, or it wasn't really implemented in a large scale. And finally, the management of rock art sites needs to be a concerted effort. Local communities can play a central role in safeguarding rock art, working in partnership with heritage practitioners, stakeholders, landowners, and farmers to manage and monitor rock art through stewardship and adopt a monument schemes, condition monitoring, and developing sustainable access to local rock art. Sorry. Recently, my colleague Tertia Barnett and I have been thinking more seriously about these risks to rock art and how to mitigate them. And we have been meeting with a few entities to raise awareness for different risks and also ways forward. And we have also worked with SCARF recently to update the Future Thinking Carved Stones framework with a section on prehistoric rock art, which was launched last month. And this includes a section on recommendations, which also touches on some of the themes that I have mentioned here today. And just to leave a few suggestions, if you'd like to know more about rock art and specifically rock art in Scotland, then you can look for Scotland's Rock Art Project's website. It's, again, as I said, it's online again. There's a range of resources to download, including this Prehistoric Rock Art in Scotland booklet. And you can also download from HES's website this short guide to identify and record Scotland's prehistoric rock art. And finally, the Getty Conservation Institute has a couple of publications addressing risks and conservation. And again, they were mostly written by researchers and heritage practitioners in other parts of the world. But they very much, a lot of what they write applies here as well. And both documents are very much worth reading. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joanna. That was a fascinating romp through all the major risks to rock art. I think it's certainly an area that needs to be raised awareness about and also more education about this, certainly. It's obviously a very important part of our archaeological heritage and something we need to be more aware of. We've got a few questions in the chat. So I'll just maybe run through those if that's okay.
Yeah,
and if anyone else has
absolutely.
any other questions, please just put them in in the chat here. So we have a question from Margaret. She says, is it possible or likely that rock art is much more widespread in the UK than currently known, as, for example, exploration for new sites is likely to focus on areas close to known examples?
Yeah, so well, firstly, I think that what we know about rock art now, it's only a small fraction of what it would be originally, because obviously there's been a level of destruction and loss with, land improvements, erosion over time, and peat building and so on, that can be kind of covering large extensions of carved rocks. So what we know about it today, we believe that it's only a small part of the number of rock arts that would have been originally. Yes, but there is definitely potential for more rock art to be found. We certainly saw that with scrap. There were, I think, around 300 new rock art sites that we were able to identify, in addition to all the ones that were already known in for Scotland, and yes, they tend to be. I suppose that people tend to look for them in areas where we already know some carvings, but also, I mean, I keep going back to this one example of one site that was found in the middle of the Highland, and there's nothing around it, which really shows that it can appear in very unpredictable places, and when we least expect, we will find something. So I believe that there's a lot more out there to be found still.
Mm, mm. And probably a lot more to be found when farmers are doing work and uncover things that maybe
Yeah,
aren't facing upwards in have
that's
just been
right.
used
Yeah,
repurposed for something else. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, he says he's got a bit of a left field question. He says, is there any crossover for management perspectives with the now obsolete Ordnance Survey benchmark system? These are also slight stone carvings, although modern and usually carved into vertical building surfaces. I've been dabbling gently into those locally, during which I've discovered from the database info that three Neolithic monoliths in Orkney have benchmarks, one
Uh-huh.
each at the Brodgar and Stennis henges and the Watchstone. No one really seems to care about benchmarks. Should they be given more attention?
Well, I mean, that's a really interesting question, because again, it goes back to that definition of what rock art is to us, because if I say, if for me, I think, so just to give you an idea, there are different approaches even to the term. So if I use the term rock art, obviously in a translation form, in, say, Iberia, this will include carvings of all periods, you know. But when we talk about rock art in the UK, the term is very much used specifically for prehistoric carvings, um, whether we consider benchmarks rock art or not, well, I suppose it's up to you to decide whether you want to include it in that expression or not. But they are carvings. They are obviously, although we know about them, they are definitely part of this world of carving. And I know that there are some people who are very interested in them, and I suppose that we are going to lose them as well, as we kind of stop using them, or they become less common. So yeah, definitely, I would say that they should definitely be paying more attention to them.
Fantastic. Um, so there's another question here that says, can you say anything about the relationship between rock art panels in Scotland and prehistoric routeways?
Okay, yeah. Well, we did some. That's a little bit kind of tangential here, isn't it? We
Yeah.
do with scrap. We did carry out quite a few um, spatial analysis to explore this relationship between rootways and rock art. So there is the suggestion that carvings would have been used to mark rootways or places of passage in the landscape. And we were very interested in exploring this idea and trying to quantify whether this would be possible or not. Or this was one of the reasons why rock art was created or not. And what we found was that in some areas, we do seem to have rock art located in areas that were likely routeways, were likely areas of preferred, you know, travel. But in others, they couldn't be further away. So sometimes it does seem to suggest that some rock art could have been used for that purpose, but in others, they are placing the rock art in really, really isolated places in the landscape. And so that one suggestion that rock art and routeways can be associated, it very much depends on the region. So I think that people were using rock art in a way that was meaningful to them and useful to them. And there were people all over the place, and there would probably be different communities, and they were using the symbols in a way that was, was meaningful to them. And so, yeah, in some cases, yes, in some cases, it was not.
Okay, thank you. There's just a comment here from Sue, who is from Australia, and she's saying that she's just fascinated to learn what you have uncovered and continue to uncover in Scotland. I suppose that just is testament to what you're saying about the rock art in other countries being much more culturally involved in their everyday lives. So,
Yeah,
yeah, it is very interesting.
thank you.
Okay, we have got a couple more questions. I'm just really conscious. Joanna has to leave at 1. Okay, so
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just highlighting that to everyone who's here. So Claire's asking the message Ray risks from campfires, barbecues, etc. is becoming more urgent, but doesn't seem to be landing. I wonder if the message related to included damage to rock art and other cultural heritage, it would land more successfully. Do you know if this has been tried anywhere?
Do you mean passing, as in alerting people for the issues with risks in campfires and barbecues because it
Yeah,
may be?
yeah.
Um, I don't know. Do you think that people would even care? I'm not sure they cared
Wow.
in general, so I'm not sure that cultural heritage would place any more importance on that. I mean, I think that we have to think about it. It's a global problem, isn't it? It's not just. I mean, wildfires affect such a large number of things. You have animals, people's livelihoods. You have the landscape, the soils, the heritage, obviously as well. It's such a big, um, overwhelming problem. I think, yes, obviously we can certainly raise awareness for the fact that it affects heritage as well, but I'm not sure that that would actually help with
Mhm.
help massively.
Mm.
I know that I'm originally from Portugal, and we have really, really big problems with wildfires, and it's devastating. The results of it, and the effect of it on in heritage is really devastating. But it doesn't seem to change. So
Mm. Yeah, I think it's very much about people seeing heritage as, it's about educating people that heritage is actually
yeah,
there and important to learn from. Yeah. Okay, I think this might be maybe our final question from Erin. So Erin's asking, are there any current methods being used for physically preserving gravestones? And if so, could they be used to assist in preserving rock art?
Uh, well, I'm not a conservationist, so I'm not the best person to answer that question. I know that in some other countries there are people applying methods yearly to kind of manage these issues with rock art. I know that in some Scandinavian countries, because of the differences in temperatures and because of the freeze and thaw, they tend to cover some of the carvings every year, and then they uncover them every year. But you can see how the resources that this would imply. Having a team that would go around and kind of covering at least some of the main ones, and recovering them every year, it would probably take, a long time, lots of people, lots of effort, lots of money, which is always the issue. We never have money for anything, uh, and less so um, every time. I know that they in some other countries they also deal with the issues of lichens by actively cleaning the stones. They've tried all sorts of different products like some sort of acids and things like that. But really, I still feel that we are lacking, and this is, I think, a global issue. Certainly in Europe, I think there are some localized studies that have been developed to look into the preservation and conservation of rock art and what people can do. But I feel that we still have a long way to go. Um, in addressing these problems and finding effective ways of doing this. But I don't know about the gravestones, I'm afraid. So I can't say much about that.
Okay. Um, does anybody else have any other questions at all? There aren't any more in the chat, so this is your final chance to pose something
Mhm.
to Joanna. Obviously, if you think of any other questions, I'm sure you can email me and I can pass those questions on to Joanna.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions, then it just really leaves me to say thank you very much for everyone joining today. It's been a really wonderful session, lots
Hopefully
of
not too
thought-provoking.
depressing.
But no, no, no. I mean, it's thought-provoking. Have to be looked at, it's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, just really to say thank you very much for everyone attending, and also obviously to you, Joanna, for giving up your time so graciously to give us this talk about this important subject.
No, it's thank you very much for inviting me. This is something that is really worrying me, so I think the more we talk about it, the better. And if anyone have any, examples of any sad stories or even happy stories about rock art sites that you may be aware of, I am interested. We are collating some information on, projects and that situations that may affect or have affected rock art sites. So if you know of anything, then yeah, just please drop me a line. I'd be very glad to hear from you.
That's great. Okay.
Okay, all right.
Thank you very much then. So we'll end the session there, and this will be live on our YouTube channel hopefully soon. Okay. Many
Thank
thanks,
you.
everyone. Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.